Hello everyone, welcome to Brave Hearts. This is Xiangling. Chinese Communist regime has waged cyber warfare against the United States for more than 2 decades now. And last week, one of the major news is regarding about SolarWind. These SolarWind companies has been hacked. And of course, the mainstream media keep blaming Russia. It's always Russia, right, for mainstream media. But today, I want to bring you a special guest, Colonel John Miller. He will have his own different views, his own insights. And Colonel Miller is Director for Cybersecurity Policy for Department of Defense when he was served in the military. And so now he's retired, but he's still a top expert for national security. So I'm really glad to have Colonel John Miller join me on today's program. Colonel Miller, welcome to our program.
Be with you, my friend and colleague.
Thank you, Colonel. We know you have been so many years working with national security. Can you first give us a little overview? When did Chinese Communist regime become the major player in cyber attack against the United States?
Sean, that is a great question. And I think what is going on in the SolarWinds episode is essentially a multi-nation attack and a coordinated attack. And I think if you look through cyber history, and I've been involved, I'm no longer inside of government, I'm no longer officially inside of government, but I'm very familiar with these cyber attacks, cyber breaches, cyber episodes. And I think really the Chinese Communist rampage through the Office of Personnel Management really came to light and really came to a head in 2015 was essentially the tipping point where China essentially surpassed Russia as the dominant player and antagonist in cyber against the United States.
Can you remind us what's the scale of the attack, on the OPM attack at the time?
That was a very, very bad breach and theft of very important information from the U.S. government. Office of Personnel Management, OPM, holds extremely valuable information, essentially the human resources or HR records of anybody who has ever been in the U.S. government, associated with the U.S. government, one way or another. Now, I'm not citing classified information or privileged or inside information. I'm just citing a New York Times article that essentially perhaps several thousand Chinese nationals were rounded up and executed because of the OPM information that was stolen by the Chinese. Now, I'm a career national security professional. To me, I immediately get it and connect the dots and understand the significance. Perhaps a number of the viewers and listeners may not immediately understand the connection, but by essentially stealing all these files, the Communist Chinese achieved a huge intelligence windfall, which led them to round up. I'll let the viewers make the connection here. I'm just citing a New York Times article. But this was really the tipping point where China surpassed. Now, I was inside the administration at that time, not as an appointee, but as a careerist in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. And I remember going through this, and I was involved in cyber breaches going all the way back to 2007, what was called Agent BTZ, which was essentially Russia. Okay, but it evolved over time, and really it was the OPM breach is, in my view of cyber history, when Communist China took the lead. And from that point forward, it was really China, 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 not Russia, Russia, Russia. Now, just for full transparency, I have no doubt that the Russians in one way or another were involved as the junior partner to the senior partner, the Chinese Communist Party. I would also surmise, with a lot of experience and knowledge of these affairs, that very most likely Iran and Venezuela were involved. And Venezuela is very concerning. Once a second term is achieved, we need to address this issue of Venezuela. Not necessarily what form of government they have, but Venezuela cannot be essentially a forward operating base for China. There's a very large Chinese footprint in Venezuela.
This is a very important concept. Can you also elaborate a little bit? Because you mentioned Venezuela is actually a forward playground, or you can say battlefield for the Chinese communist regime, or forward base, right, for them to launch attack, even whether it's in Latin America or against the United States, right?
Yeah, all forms of attack, theft, thievery. It is a foreign operating base, and we need to address this. And then Venezuela, to be totally honest, supports even a Chinese footprint along in the northern Mexican states, just south of our border. So that the forward operating base are the northern states of Mexico. So we need to address this decisively. And there is a very large footprint. Historically, it was originally kind of Russia, but Iran, China are very involved. You know, Iran has a very large Chinese footprint also. So Iran and Venezuela are essentially proxies or puppets of essentially the Chinese Communist Party here. This is the threat we have to deal with. There's also a very interesting intersection, and again, this was released in public news here many years ago. But I was inside and was aware of this and involved in this. Was the Obama administration specifically shut down an NSA look into the intersection of voting machines in Venezuela?
Wow! Why
in the world would Venezuela be specializing in voting machines? And this was going far back as 2005, 2006. What in the world? And that back then you had Hugo Chavez, just a thug, a communist thug. So dabbling, noodling with what I would call the firmware, essentially the simple lines of code in these voting machines. And they're dangerous. They serve no purpose, as we're finding out in this election. Dominion's operating concept of taking all the votes from all candidates, putting them together, and then using a statistical apportionment to spin the votes back out. That's wrong. There is absolutely no design reason for doing that other than fraud, other than fooling the people. That is just reprehensible. And sure enough, back years ago, and this was a direct result of the 2002 Helping Americans Vote Act. Never, ever, ever trust a nice-sounding piece of legislation.
So can you also tell us a little bit more about exactly what happened this time, and what's the scale of this SolarWinds attack, and also what do you think about the Communist Party's role in this attack?
Well, yeah. So I'm not privy to exactly what's going on, but from what I've been able to piece together from a number of sources, this is a massive intrusion into critical infrastructure, into the energy sector. I've seen reports of Department of Energy, Microsoft, CISA, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, where the former infamous Chris Krebs was working. I've seen they've been sharing information, dialoguing, talking to each other. That kind of tells me this is related to different variants of the Microsoft operating system. A lot of critical infrastructure operates on very, very dated operating systems of various types. But there's lots of infrastructure out there very likely still working on Windows 7 and below. These are old, vulnerable, insecure systems. But the reality is it's Eugene Kaspersky, who is Russian, but most likely the Russians are essentially cooperating or acting on behalf of the Chinese in this scenario. Eugene Kaspersky used to say something very interesting. It's old, it's DOS, it still works, don't touch it. And that's the problem with a lot of this infrastructure. It's working, don't touch it. Well, that's the problem, though. Somebody is going to touch it eventually when they realize how vulnerable it is.
Right, so Cyber Command is actually being elevated its status to 4-star general presiding on it now, and being talked about it can take proactive attack instead of just always defense, right? So what do you think about the current situation? Does the Cyber Command now qualify to take actions more proactively now?
I think the critical thing that the American nation state should be doing is imposing cost for bad behavior. Imposing cost, whether it's through Cyber Command, whether it's through trade sanctions, whether it's through sailing more ships through the South China Seas, etc., etc., imposing cost. With the OPM breach, there was a change of attitude, and there was an ask for give us response options that impose cost. So these were top secret proceedings. I said, okay, here you go. Here's a list of things. No, we can't do. No, oh, John.
We can't do that.
We can't
do that.
No. I mean, if you fight terrorism, you create terrorism. If you fight the communist Chinese, you just create more communist Chinese somehow. This logic just doesn't make any sense. So you want creative response options? Here they are.
Yes.
You obviously, they don't want them. But it's funny, a little bit later, as things went on in early 16, there was the frustration was approaching anger in the Obama administration toward the communist Chinese. We've done everything they've told us to do. We've kowtowed to them. We've done this, we've done that, and they still are stealing everything. You know, that really makes us angry. Well, finger wagging and aggressive speech making does not impress the Chinese communists. So, but it's funny because they came back to me in early 16 and said, John, we're at the point now, we really want to impose cost. Where's that list? Where's that list that you gave us about a year ago?
But it's too late, right? When they're looking for your list, it's already too late.
I just told them I couldn't find it. So, but the Trump administration has been remarkable. From day one, it was imposed cost.